The opinions expressed on Plastic Fantastic are intended for educational and informational purposes only and are not meant as a diagnosis, treatment, or substitute for professional medical advice. The mention of any product, treatment, or procedure on the show does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation and is purely for the information and education of the public.
Welcome to Plastic Fantastic, a weekly show dedicated to the latest in plastic surgery, aesthetics, beauty, and wellness. Now, here are your hosts, board-certified surgeons Dr. Robert Silich and Dr. Olivia Hutchinson.
Good afternoon.
Good evening.
Good morning.
And good morrow. And welcome.
And welcome to Plastic Fantastic, Dr. Olivia Hutchinson.
And Dr. Robert Silich.
You know.
Today is...
What is today?
It's another beautiful day in May.
Hooray, hooray, the 1st of May.
What is it? After the April showers bring May flowers?
That's what they say, but we didn't get a lot of... Did we get a lot of showers in April?
I think we're just getting showers all the time. It's showering us with happy thoughts.
Wow.
Bountiful. Excitement, experiences in New York City.
Today's a tricky show.
It's tricky because I don't know anything about it.
Right. We don't like to talk about it, and it's something that we don't know enough about. And
we learn as we go.
The best things in life are free.
You can give them to the birds and bees.
But I want money.
And I don't want blossoms in Central Park. We do want blossoms in Central Park.
That's the theme, money. And the reason we picked it is because, or we should say, the theme is the business side of what we do, the commerce side of plastic surgery. Unfortunately,
the dirty side.
There have been so many articles in the last month about these
charges, fees, exorbitant numbers.
I was going to say something controversial, but these really crazy numbers.
Prithee, do tell.
Nah, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. It'll spill out. Anyway, you're listening to Plastic Fantastic with Dr. Olivia Hutchinson.
And Dr. Robert Silich.
You can email us, I'll say this at the outset, at plasticfantasticshow@gmail.com. Let's get into it. So why are we talking about this in general, and why are we talking about it today?
Am I supposed to answer that?
Yeah, that was a question. That wasn't rhetorical. That was actually a question.
It wasn't just the Socratic method of let's ponder the meaning of life and the importance of medicine and plastic surgery in people's lives. I was reading, can I just go off on a side?
That's the best part of what we do. We just have to officially have a topic, and then we start running and I start chasing.
Nobody's going to reel me in. So I'm reviewing some articles and poster presentations for the annual society meeting.
Which
in
society
October,
would that
the
be?
ASPS, so the American Society of Plastic Surgeons.
Okay. It's funny, I'm a reviewer for the other one.
Yeah, well,
look at you. You're in the more prestigious one, actually.
There's no comparison between the two. They sort of do slightly different things.
Well, they used to be when we were younger. Now I think they're both pretty equal. There's two big bodies that we're talking about. One is the Aesthetic Society and one is the American Society of Plastic Surgeons. And we're both reviewers for their respective journals. That's interesting.
So, this is for the meeting, which is happening in October, but it's similar sort of thing. So the first poster that I was reviewing was a little study that was done to see whether medical students really understood the meaning and the significance of plastic surgeons and plastic surgery, what they do. And these are medical students, right? So they've already entered the field of medicine.
You would think that they would have a better grasp on it than
some
the average
idea,
guy.
Right? And apparently it was interesting because there was a huge shift, and I forget exactly how many students they looked at, but it was several hundred. So it wasn't just, two. But there was a significant change both in terms of the perspective of what plastic surgeons do and the fact that it's not just cosmetic. Also dealt with the social media impact on how these medical students' understanding and appreciation of plastic surgery had been changed and, shall we say, negatively impacted.
I am not the least bit surprised because I'll tell you, even at way higher levels in medicine have I encountered this. Just recently, I had an interview with the upper brass, as I would say, of the departments of surgery where we work.
The trombones and the French horn?
Totally. And let me tell you, these guys, I might as well have been next to a hairdresser on their list of...
Let's not...
I'm not kidding.
Let's not disparage the hairdresser.
Well, exactly. Literally, I was like, wow, really? I was explaining about our contribution to the residents, which we share surgical residents. Why do you see residents? Well, because we teach them, you
how
teach
to
them
operate?
Facelifts and breast augmentations? I said, no. How about burns? How about congenital defects? How about hand surgery? How about cancer reconstruction?
All the reconstruction,
How about wounds? So it's a problem. Now, here's the thing that's tricky about us, which is what we're going to try and talk about today if we can. Being in private practice and not having boundaries of insurance-based reimbursement because cosmetic elective surgery is not reimbursed by insurance plans.
Yep.
In the United States, anyway.
As of yet.
So now surgeons have to do another thing, plastic surgeons. We have to now monetize what we do. So we have to figure out, okay, in a perfect world, what would you charge for that operation? And it's very tricky. And by the way, there is no standard. It's basically just been passed down over the generations. I know when I first went into practice with an older surgeon, I asked, what do you charge for this? And I didn't even know it during residency. I mean, you probably didn't either. Get out into practice and you're like, okay, wow, I got to put a number on this operation that I know how to do. You know, when you factor in all this. The reason you and I are talking about this today, let's be honest, is there has been a crazy skyrocketing of fees across the country by, for the most part, non-board certified plastic surgeons that have just put a number on what they do that is just...
And has yet to be verified, perhaps?
Crazy money, as my cousin Paul used to say. Crazy money.
Yes, that's correct. I think that we've talked about this before, too, in terms of how articles are written or social media stories are created. There is a blurring of the lines, to put it delicately, between the various providers, the surgeons, the training, the nomenclature. I'm going to come back to this in a second, but just to finish up with this poster review that I was doing, the way that they changed the perceptions of the medical student was by showing them a 6-minute video by a plastic surgeon who basically explained in 6 minutes, which is not very long, almost like a TED Talk, right? What are those, 11 minutes or something?
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, okay. And how it drastically impacted for the better.
We could probably do it in a minute and a half.
But 6 minutes is not a lot when you think
Right.
about it. So, but to go back to the way that these stories are propagated, if it's something that is put into print, and we could talk about what has happened to journalism recently and what is written and what the sources are.
Remember
and
in the Ten
propaganda.
Commandments with Charlton Heston? So as it is written, so as it is done.
Oh, yes. That takes us back a few years.
It does, but, you know, if you write it down, it must be true. If you
Yes.
see it in print, hey, I read it in People magazine, it's got to be true.
Right.
Right.
I think that we've had a long and distinguished history of propaganda in many countries under many different types of regimes and political situations. And, you know, it can be done very, very effectively on all sides. The most important thing is to provide sources of information that are reliable. I mean, you and I grew up when we had libraries that we would go to and look at books.
And
that
books
were
in the office. Now I have half of our textbooks we keep in storage now.
to
You
your
know?
point of,
God,
you know,
we sound so old.
we're not that old, but
I
that's
know,
the whole
but we
point,
sound
right?
so-
Things have changed so dramatically.
Right.
People now will believe, doesn't mean that you're stupid or that you're uneducated. I think it's just a certain degree of assumption that goes on and perhaps naivete, but they'll look at some sort of information online. Wikipedia, I think, is a prime example because you can write pretty much anything on Wikipedia and
Yeah, Wikipedia is pretty funny.
yeah, but you know, it stands. So
Sure.
there's a recreation of the narrative and of historical facts and not dates so much, but the lens is clouded. My point about going to the library is that,
Please.
you know, before Encyclopedia Britannica went to print and was a bound volume, I don't know how many people fact checked, but there were lots of people who were involved in that and made
Yeah.
sure that the information was reliable.
And they still have it, by the way.
And they still have it, absolutely. But that was like the source of information, the Oxford English Dictionary, same
Yep.
sort of thing. And there are plenty of others. Now it's like, oh, well, there was a story on Instagram
Right.
and the influencer said it, ergo, it must be correct and it must be reliable. And I think when you're growing up in this new environment, even though the phenomenon is not that old, it totally changes your appreciation of what you're being told and how much of it is trustworthy.
Well, one of those things that you just reminded me of is the listener may not know that all of the articles you see in fashion magazines, in popular culture magazines, whatever it might be, society magazines about plastic surgery are not generated from an event that's in the news. They're generated by public relations firms and by plastic surgeons themselves, possibly a patient. If there is an unfortunate, horrible thing in the news, like a death, yes, that will be in...
The patient didn't generate.
No, but that'll be like in a regular news outlet, which is different. All of the stuff that the average person reads, you have to understand what's behind that. We get solicited day in and day out by medical writers and writers in these magazines that say, hey, what's new in plastic surgery? What should I write about? What's the new thing? It's not like they're hungry for stories, and all you need is a bunch of very well-paid PR people to say, I'll tell you what the new story is. It's a deep plane facelift. I'll tell you what the new story is. It's the Brazilian butt lift, whatever the procedure of the moment is, and it's generated by the surgeons and their PR people. And that's really all that it's about.
And it has to have a catchy name, because if it doesn't have a catchy name, then it's not a good enough hook, right?
Correct.
Because you need to get people interested in what that is. And, most recently there was another article. We're going to come back a little bit to the business of plastic surgery, but there was another article where the writer was trying to explain the differences in technique and in tissue layers. It sort of missed the mark in terms of what the different procedures are and how the surgery itself is carried out and the dissection and everything. And just to try to narrow it down to explaining everything in the space of one sentence, I think is just so indicative of what happens when you equate all the training and we talk about this ad nauseum practically. Somebody's nausea. It's definitely...
Yeah. And I don't blame the writer. The writers, they're lay people. They're writers. They're journalists. They're supposed to...
Yeah, it's not nefarious. It's just
not at all. They're supposed to get information, and a lot of people, however, on our side of the equation, the surgeons, will exploit that. You mentioned naivete or whatever it might be of a journalist to say, hey, this is really what's going on right now. And you really have to look at peer-reviewed things. You have to ask around, because just what you read in popular magazines is absolutely not necessarily and should not be what you go to your doctor to see.
And of course, there's so much more that goes into practicing medicine. But just to get back to the differences between what we get to do as plastic surgeons and what most other doctors who don't have privilege, shall we say, of not dealing with insurance companies.
Right.
I think that there's been such a change, certainly in the years since we entered practice, and certainly not for the better condition of the patient. So many facets to healthcare in the United States. A lot of it makes sense, and then there's some things that are very difficult to explain. And I think one of the major issues that people forget is that private insurers are for-profit companies. And like anything that's for-profit, they are looking to make money not for the patients. They're not there to provide care for the patient. That's definitely not what their fiduciary responsibility is. It's to make money for their shareholders. And so obviously maximizing profits means minimizing expenses, and therein lies the rub. So
we're going to talk about what all the various fees are that you should think about. Not so much what the fees are, but what types of fees there should be.
And also some of the questions that you should be asking, and some of the aspects of providing care that do have financial component to it, so that the public and our listeners and everybody else who might be tuning in will understand how that formula works. And to some extent, of course, it is arbitrary. If you have an email that you'd like to send us, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, please do so. plasticfantasticshow@gmail.com. That's our email address. You're listening to Plastic Fantastic
with Dr. Olivia Hutchinson
and Dr. Robert Silich.
We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back.
Plastic Fantastic with Dr. Robert Silich and Dr. Olivia Hutchinson returns in moments.
Well, we've had a lot thrown at us lately, but hard times just make us stronger. Seen through with faith and family, the bedrock of our community. We do things our own way, and we do what's best. So I've made a choice, and my hope is that you would make one too. For our kids, for our community, for each other. Please, consider vaccination.
Brought to you by the GreenShootsFoundation.org.
Women get a lot of advice about self-care these days, but one of the most important self-care steps we can take is making sure we're financially secure later in life. For small steps you can take to save for retirement, visit WeSaySaveIt.org. A message from AARP and the Ad Council.
The YMCA is just a starting line. For the true self blooms only when we find our purpose, what makes us tick below the surface. My why is diversity in unity, a safe space in my community, living with sincerity, giving every day my everything. With my why, I stand strong, seen and supported all along. It's a million faces in a mirror, and everyone belongs. Find your why. Learn more at ymca.org for a better us.
Melissa from Michigan. I work an extra part-time job serving lunch at my child's school, but I still can't afford to put food on our table.
Daniel from California. Choosing whether to pay the rent or pay to fix the car to get to work doesn't leave us with much at all. Now we can't even pay for meals.
Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America.
Now, back to Plastic Fantastic with Dr. Robert Silich and Dr. Olivia Hutchinson. Email plasticfantasticshow@gmail.com.
I've got you under my skin where the rain can get in. But if the sweat pours out, just shout. I'll try to swim and pull you out.
Welcome back to Plastic Fantastic with Dr. Olivia Hutchinson.
And Dr. Robert Silich.
Today we're talking about the commerce side of what we do. A lot of stuff in the news lately about how expensive it is. I don't know if it's related to inflation that's in the country now or just that I think the luxury industry of which we get lumped into has kind of expounded and exploded, especially post-pandemic, as you like to say, post-pandemia.
Yes, I don't know. I think we're in a state of pandemia for quite some time.
That. Yeah. I told you I love it. So let's talk about it. So in general, there are, should we say 3 fees probably? So there's a fee for a facility, wherever this is done.
For having surgery.
Surgery. Mm-hmm. Let's say you're going to have an operation. There's 3 fees. So the first one, which is kind of the fixed one for the most part, is the facility fee, whether this is at an outpatient surgical center, a surgical ambulatory office setting, a hospital setting. There is a fee for that. If it is elective and cosmetic, that is a fee that you pay for. And what is that for? That's for supplies, for per diem nurses, for nursing staff, for ancillary staff, for equipment. It could be breast implants, it could be suture material. So that's a general
and the use of the operating room itself.
Using the operating room itself.
So the space, right, the physical
anesthesia
aspect. Mm-hmm. That's number 2.
Number 2 is the anesthesiologist, and they are, in New York at least, they are paid, or they should be paid separately. That's an independent fee. And then the biggest fee of them all,
so can we just stop for a second on anesthesia? Because I think that's one of the major concerns, certainly for younger patients who come in, maybe even minors who need to have surgery. I think for the parents, that's their biggest concern is the anesthesia. And also for patients who haven't had surgery before, sometimes they get very anxious or at least concerned about that. Very important to know that there are 2 different types of providers of anesthesia. There are anesthesiologists who are doctors and who should be board certified. They have their own board certification process.
Right.
And then there are anesthetists who are nurse anesthetists. And so those are not physicians. They cannot work independently. They need to be under the supervision of an anesthesiologist. So again, the nomenclature there is something that I think the lay public probably doesn't necessarily know or isn't aware of. But, we always work in our facility with an anesthesiologist, a board certified anesthesiologist. I think it's extremely important, like with anything, to make sure that whoever the professionals are that are involved with your care throughout every aspect of your surgery are properly qualified, trained, and certified. So make sure that you're working with a board certified anesthesiologist, and that will be reflected in the fee to some extent.
And nurse anesthetists, by the way, work all the time in big hospital centers, and they're excellent. But there's a system in play for those nurse anesthetists to work in a major hospital center. Some of the biggest hospital medical centers in New York City and the biggest cancer centers in New York City all employ nurse anesthetists.
Yeah, and they're part of the team, certainly.
And they're excellent. Now, when you do that in an office, it's a little bit trickier, and I will give you the big spoiler alert. The reason it's done in the office is a financial reason. The fee for a nurse anesthetist is much lower than the fee would be for a physician, for an anesthesiologist. So that's the second big fee. And then the third one, which is probably the most substantial one of all, or at least in terms of the one you're going to be asking the most about, is the surgical fee, which is the fee that goes to the surgeon who does it. That really is the one that can vary. It used to be, it was kind of a pretty tight little window of what it would be. But now, my goodness, the sky's the limit. The sky is the limit. That's exactly right. Just so you know out there, listener, it is generated by nothing more than commerce. So if somebody decides, hey, I am worth this.
Add a couple of zeros.
Add a couple of zeros. Make it a phone number.
Why stop at 2?
Right.
Make
exactly.
it 5 zeros.
And rise is exponential. And there's a little bit of like competition, I think I would say. What's the good thing between surgeons? Well, I charge this. Well, I charge this. And it's always getting higher and higher and higher. And you're like, okay, well, you must be good if you charge that much money.
There are some other very unnecessary forms of competition out there. And I think this is just one manifestation.
A friend of mine from college who became a plastic surgeon had a great quote recently in one of these articles about fees. And he said, if you have a Timex or you have a Rolex, they both tell time. And they both tell time really well.
Which one do you have?
I don't have either, actually.
You're much too sophisticated.
And they said, no, not at all. He said, if you want to be that person that wants to get a Rolex to tell the same amount of time, then go for it. Nothing wrong with that. Or do you want to be somebody that is...
It's like the labels, the haute fashion, couture.
I guess. And by the way, that gets brought into our field as well. Bespoke plastic surgery. And I know it's one of a kind, and it's like commissioning a portrait of your face. I know you're giving me that look, and I'm just
do you not commission portraits of your face to hang on all your walls at home?
I do not. I mean, you and I are...
How much of a narcissist do we need to be?
We're doctors, you know what I mean? And I think you have to still be a doctor. And there's nothing wrong with making a good living at all. We've worked really, really hard to get here.
I do think also that it's interesting that some of the important things get skipped over, such as training and experience and actual ability. There is a confluence of skills that are not always attributed to the right types of elements. So because somebody has a really good website or is very active on social media, that is not equivalent to being a really good surgeon. We actually had this issue with, not you and I personally, but the plastic surgery profession all of a sudden saw these doctors who became very active on social media. And there was one, I believe he's down in Florida and Miami or something, who has X number of million followers or something like that. And I haven't actually seen the account, but I remember reading an article about it.
Board certified, real guy?
He's a plastic surgeon. He may be Soltz something or other. Dr. Mike or Dr. I don't know. I'm going to say the wrong name.
Oh,
so
I think I know who you mean. Oh, no, I think he's like an ER doctor, isn't he?
No, he's a plastic surgeon. He'll film like BBLs and stuff, Brazilian butt lifts.
He's a big Instagram guy or something.
Dr. Miami, that's what it is. Dr. Mike is a different guy. I think this guy is Dr. Miami. Anyway, and I think he really kind of pushed the limits on what plastic surgeons were doing with social media in general, even starting with having a website. Now that has replaced the yellow pages. We were talking about that the other day. When you started out, you needed to be found and you would get found.
Pays to be listed.
In the yellow pages, okay. And now we've, of course, gone much, much farther than that. But I do think that it really has created this false sense of, oh, this person is very busy because they post, photos of the same person. And of course, you and I look at these things and it's like, oh, wait, that's the same person, different angle. Or they crop things out and then they show the same images.
Well,
or the Photoshop.
My favorite thing is when my colleagues put stuff on their website and it's their office staff. I'm like, oh, I know her. That's the office manager. That's the receptionist. Which, I get, because not every patient, and most patients actually probably do not want to have their face listed either in private books that we keep in the office of before and afters, or the stuff that's more available, which would be online. But, these are all tricks of the trade, as we say.
And the other thing that happens, which is not always, how now I guess there's been some, I wouldn't say furor, but at least some reaction from the users of these social media accounts. And so if you are putting a post or putting something on your story that is actually an advertisement, that's a commercial post, because you're getting paid or you're getting something free in return, those advertisers, there's a disclaimer, right? They put like a little hashtag ad, or they put in collaboration with or something. There's something on that post that indicates that you have a financial interest in saying something good about the brand. That also happens to some extent, and each plastic surgeon out there or physician can do their own thing, but sometimes those patients will have their photos used or their images used in exchange for a discount on the procedures or free surgery or whatever it is, and that's not indicated in those posts. So it's kind of interesting that our society really hasn't started to look at those things more closely and figure out you really need to inform the public when somebody agrees to something in exchange for a financial reward of some sort.
You're listening to Plastic Fantastic with Dr. Olivia Hutchinson.
And Dr. Robert Sillich.
You could email us at plasticfantasticshow@gmail.com, and you could listen to us at all the major podcasting platforms such as Spotify, Spreaker, iTunes podcasts, YouTube,
and many more.
Many more.
Coming down the pipeline.
Coming soon.
So you also wanted to talk about a little bit in terms of the stuff that's different about plastic surgeons not having to deal with insurance companies. How much of the work that you do you think you still interact with insurance companies?
For me personally, it's probably about 10%.
Yeah.
And obviously none of it is cosmetic. It's the other side of it, which is all the reconstructive stuff.
Or like excisions, like lipomas,
yeah,
or
that kind of
sort
stuff,
thing.
right. The non-cosmetic things or the reconstructive stuff that we do at the hospital. And it's difficult. I mean, I have to tell you, that is a whole other industry that most of us do not have to deal with by doing things electively and cosmetically.
Increasingly more difficult as well.
Absolutely.
Which is something that we've also noticed since we've had the pleasure of dealing with these companies over the course of many years.
I mean, to give you an example, one thing that's different is you have to have electronic medical records, EMR it's called. You and I are not in that generation that had it. We're kind of straddling the two generations, but virtually every physician that comes out now, even if they're going into private practice, they basically have some kind of a electronic medical record system. We have a bit of a hybrid in our generation, but going forward, there's that. An added cost, and it also is an element of losing a little bit of control of your own practice because basically someone else is regulating it, and that makes it all standardized. So it's very hard to stand out as a practitioner from the next guy or the next woman next door to you if you're in that kind of standardized electronic medical records where everybody's getting reimbursed the same amount.
Well, the other thing also with those electronic records is that because it's electronic, it can be breached. And so there are data breaches that happen.
Yep.
And then all this stuff, of course, is supposed to be, I'm assuming, the most regulated in terms of privacy issues of pretty much any profession that I can think of. I'm not talking about Defense Department stuff or, military top secret information, that sort of thing. But there's so much information that's privileged and confidential. We have HIPAA laws that basically govern everything that is transmitted or that should be transmitted between physicians and what gets divulged. So many restrictions on what we can say. And with electronic health records, that is definitely a point of vulnerability, certainly for the larger hospitals, but also for private practices where people who have, nefarious ideas can go after this information and then either divulge it or ask for monies to, have your screen unlocked or whatever those things are when they get into your computer. So the hackers, right?
Now, there is a good side to this, which we should talk about. The flip side of things being fee-for-service, not just for the physician. I think it also is a very, very good benefit to the patient as well.
Yeah.
And we should come back and talk about that.
And we're going to come back and talk about it. But I like the fact that you came up with something really positive and optimistic to say.
Absolutely. And I'm going to get there.
Unprompted, too.
Well, we painted a bit of a dark picture because
it's the reality that people don't think about.
And you and I have been inundated with this whole thing about fees and how much it costs and all this stuff. It's almost punitive to the patient lately.
It used to be a reasonable approach to say, yes, insurance will cover this. And now literally every single patient who asks me, we have to, or ask the office manager, they have to explain to them why you really can't rely on the insurance companies to cover, quote unquote, anything. You're listening to Plastic Fantastic with Dr. Robert Sillich.
And Dr. Olivia Hutchinson.
And we're going to be right back.
Money, get away. Get a good job with more paying you're okay.
Don't go anywhere. Plastic Fantastic will be right back.
Dan Hicks with Paul Azinger, welcoming you back to the Healthy Stand Classic. And Zing, she has been absolutely tremendous today, but it all comes down to this shot.
It does, Dan, and you couldn't ask for better conditions. 68 degrees, just a slight 2-mile-an-hour breeze, and a UV index of 3. This is absolutely critical.
That is right. This direct exposure to midday sun could be increasing her risk to melanoma.
It looks like she's making a change.
Yeah, she's putting that putter back in the bag. Now let's see what she takes out.
Oh, wow. Looks like she's pulling out a 15.
I don't know. Looks like she's going with a 30.
Strong choice. She's going to want to use the recommended SPF 30 even on a cloudy day.
And notice how she's using broad spectrum sunscreen.
And a generous amount, too.
Incredible.
That was a masterful performance.
That was pretty good, too.
Stand Up to Cancer and Optum want to help you reduce your risk for cancer. Visit TakeAHealthyStand.org.
Nearly half of all adults in the United States have high blood pressure. 50% of those with high blood pressure do not have their condition under control.
Uncontrolled high blood pressure can lead to heart attack, stroke, and other serious health issues. People with high blood pressure can create treatment plans with their doctor that can help reduce their risk.
Your blood pressure numbers could change your life. Start taking the right steps at manageyourbp.org.
A message from the American Heart Association and American Stroke Association.
Plastic Fantastic.
Welcome back to Plastic Fantastic with Dr. Olivia Hutchinson.
And Dr. Robert Sillett.
Today we're talking about the commerce side of plastic surgery. How we make a living.
Show me the
how
money.
How we put food on the table. That's right. How we keep the lights on, as I tell the patients.
How do you put food on the table? You actually cook it,
yeah.
Which is, can we go there a little bit? No.
Please, I need a break from all this talk about money. It's killing me.
Well, what do you do with your money? Well, we buy food because we like to cook.
Absolutely. What'd you cook last night?
I made ramps, actually. Ramps are...
They're in season, and they're quite expensive. Thinking about money, at least in Manhattan, ramps are a lot of money.
That's right.
Ramp is a cross between like a scallion and a leek, maybe.
Something, yeah.
They're good.
They're very yummy. So
big in Japan too. By the way,
are they?
Yeah,
that's a song.
That is a song,
yes.
A good one.
Alphaville
from the 80s. Mm-hmm. Amen. See?
Okay.
I love it. But you didn't just have ramps. You had ramps and what?
No, with steak.
I knew you were going to say that.
Always steak.
Good for you.
But the interesting thing is that I went to a restaurant and they had ramps sort of chopped up in their pasta. And they only offer that dish because it's such a short season for them. And apparently, since we're on the food topic, and what's better than talking about
ramps
food other than eating the food itself with maybe a little glass of vino on the side. The nice farmer who brought the ramps to the farmer's market was explaining that they're a little bit stunted in their growth because we had that cold spell right when they were developing. So this year, not only is the ramps season going to be
I've been seeing them at the market lately.
Have you made them ever? It's pretty.
I have, but there's not. I don't really like to cook them that much. I think you can grill them a little bit.
Yeah.
The way you would grill scallions or onions or something.
Right.
But they're good. They've got a good little.
They're very
taste
flavorful.
To them.
So.
And they're tiny.
Yeah.
And they look kind of cool. And it's cool to say, we're having ramps tonight.
Yes. We need to look up the Latin.
Why are they called ramps?
What's the origin, or what did you call them?
No idea.
The other thing I listened to the other day was a talk about plants and civilization. So there were two professors who were talking about this book that they had written, but they discussed all the various, very far-reaching geographical spots all over the world that they had gone to, and how the diet influenced, for example, the development of Alzheimer's and dementia, and how there were these places where they had a very high rate, and they related it to some of the foods that they were eating and how this toxin gets into your brain. So, sort of the
mix between plants. So I'm going to guess the more processed foods in communities had the higher rates
so they were
Alzheimer's.
Actually looking at somewhere in the Amazon, I think, or Southeast Asia, someplace far away that I've never been to. But it was something in the leaves of what they were eating that had this very high component that was actually a toxin to nerve cells. It wasn't even...
So not necessarily
processed, right.
Wow.
Which again goes to what are some of the plants that we use for medicinal purposes, and how many of these drugs do we extract from things that are found in nature, like digoxin, right? That's penicillin. I mean, we can go...
Yeah, that's right.
All of these different things. So I thought that was very interesting. Have you been to South America, to the Amazon rainforest,
it's not good for your hair.
Papua New Guinea, any of these places?
No.
The humidity is a
problem.
problem.
The humidity is really rough in the rainforest.
Yeah,
I'm not
for
sure
me, it's the
worth
bugs.
It.
I can't deal with the bugs.
I'm not a big fan of the bugs either, but you could shoo them away with your hairdryer.
If you had a power source. Is there such a thing as solar-powered hair dryers?
No, but note to self, not a bad idea, not a bad invention.
We've come up with something else just to help the world, because, we're always out there to do that. So.
Yeah, no, I have not been to that part of the world.
But it's interesting to see how different cultures incorporate things that are found in nature. And you are what you eat. We talk about this all the time. And even as it applies to plastic surgery.
You're a big steak with ramps.
I'm a steak with a lot of things.
I like that.
You have to start with the steak. You need to have some carbs with it.
No, but I
too.
love it. I can always count on you to have like a good...
Wow.
What cut did you make? Are you cooking for the whole crew?
Yeah, I do filet just because it's so easy, and
Yeah.
then you don't have to worry about the fat. And
Do you make it in the oven or do you
So
grill it?
I put it on the pan.
Sear it?
And sear it, yeah. We're of the
I told you about
very
this
lightly-
reverse searing thing. You
I know.
gotta look into it.
I haven't done that yet. It's
pretty cool.
I'm a traditionalist. I feel
I am too, but by the way, I haven't tried it, but I think you should try it. 'Cause then you can let me know about how it is. So we were going to talk about the positive side of fee-for-service
Oh, I thought we were going to
medicine.
talk about some recipes.
We're going to get right back to it. I just wanted to get this in because you were so happy that I came up with something positive.
Yes.
And I want to
Well,
try
steak
and,
is positive.
It is. I
Cooking
want to
is
try and
positive.
hang on to this for a while.
Okay, go ahead. The floor is yours.
So the fee-for-service model, which was the model in medicine for years, has an advantage. It is a direct relationship. There's no third party. And the way it stands now in modern medicine is if it's a very, very small percentage, I think, of medicine in general is fee-for-service any longer because it's pretty much all insurance. I mean, outside major metropolitan areas, I think it's almost all insurance-based. And there are a handful of people where it is not. I think that the privatization of it is much nicer. You have a better experience. You're not a number. Literally, you're not a insurance claim number. It's a very simple,
isn't that just
clean
the worst?
transaction.
I hate that so much.
That's right. And my experience has been that the physicians that exist in that model are more attentive, more direct, and the communication is much, much closer. Now, I don't think that it's a reasonable thing to say that all of the future of medicine is going to be in that fee-for-service model because I just don't think financially, for most people, it's going to work. But it is a relic of a bygone era in medicine, the so-called golden age of medicine, that some of us, you and I, still practice. And to me, it allows the surgeon and the patient to have a much closer and a more direct relationship, I think.
I totally agree. And I think it's interesting when you look at some of these studies that they've done or when they've evaluated the interaction between a physician and the patient. And one of the things that repeatedly comes up as a sore point for the patients is this feeling that the surgeon or the physician was not paying attention to them because they were entering data into the iPad or whatever they're using for their electronic health record.
And it literally happens in a doctor's office. Like you're sitting with your physician and they have a laptop in front of them and they're entering in your information.
Right. So you lose the eye contact. You lose that sense that somebody's actually listening to you.
Right.
And I know that some offices have a scribe now where they bring somebody in just
Scribe?
Yes.
Come here.
In the toga.
Hither over here, scribe. Right.
With the, you were talking about
I was thinking more medieval, but yeah. Scribe.
No, with the stone pallets and the chisel that they had to enter into the
Tom Waits, the musician, tells a funny story on
about scribes.
About Scribe, yeah. There's a YouTube little snippet of him and Keith Richards, and he talks about one night where he was with Keith late into the evening.
No.
Smoking and drinking and smoking, and writing music together. And I don't know, Tom said they came up with some great thing, and we realized no one wrote it down. And Keith said, "Scribe," and he kept shouting "Scribe" till some little poor production assistant, some little PA or somebody
identified
came in,
as a scribe,
right? Came in as the
over.
scribe and
Yeah.
started like writing stuff down for them. That's what made me think of Scribe.
Yes, that's pretty fun. I did not know that, but see, I learn things from you all the time.
I mean, you and I don't even really write in the chart initially when we're with patients. You sit with them, you look them in the eyes, and you talk to them.
Right.
And then, you go back and I dictate and you like to write longhand. I mean, and everybody does it kind of their own way.
But it's much easier also when you're writing. I don't even have to look down at the paper. I can write and just look at the patient.
Well,
so,
la-di-da, look at you.
I've been doing it for so
really?
long. Then I can't read my handwriting
Interesting.
after. That's the best thing, right? When the doctor can't read their own handwriting.
Totally.
But the other aspect of plastic surgery, and you were talking about how we make ourselves available to our patient. There are two things that are relatively recent. The concierge medicine concept, which is where you pay a fee, I guess, a yearly fee. It's almost like being part of a club. And then you have access to your physician all the time, which is kind of funny because it's like, wait, how do you not have access?
I know.
To me, that always
like it's a
seemed
special
like,
thing. And we hear it all the time.
Change?
We're like, wow, I spend more time talking to my plastic surgeon than I do talking to my internist.
Right.
And that's sad.
It's certainly different than how things used to be. And you still have some practices that allow themselves the time, but in many cases they can't. But the other phenomenon, which is, I think, also relatively recent, is in terms of the whole commercial aspect of plastic surgery and medicine in general, when you have private equity firms that have now bought practices or
Right.
are somehow involved involved in these
management services.
Yes. And so they invest in these groups. I know they've done it with dermatology groups, and they've done it with infertility practices, where they really apply a for-profit, obviously, because they're, private equity. And so their purpose, again, is to make money. And they will try to address inefficiencies, things that make sense, but also they change the whole approach to medicine.
Absolutely.
So that you are forced to meet certain quotas or benchmarks or whatever the appropriate. I'm not a business person, in case you
and
weren't
in
aware.
medicine they have these things called RVUs, which a lot of the medical centers use
relative
too.
value units.
Right, and you have to get so many RVUs to get a bonus. I mean, you do not have to have a degree in economics to see that if you're monetizing or if you're rewarding a higher number of RVUs, which means more operative cases, more procedures, I mean, it's virtually impossible to keep that legislatively clean. It's just human nature that it's such a conflict of interest. It's so difficult. That's one of the things we don't have to deal with.
What's related to that, and I know that you work a lot with the cardiac surgeons as well, is if you look, for example, at data, because now everything is big data and more data and increasing numbers of data points across the board. When you look at things like complications or hospital stay or outcomes, because a lot of it is about outcomes and who does better. Places that do very complicated cases where the patients are sicker, say, or have more morbidities or have a lesser chance of having a positive outcome. Those types of places may actually provide fallacious types of results where they would appear to show that the outcomes are worse when in fact they're taking on these very complicated cases.
Absolutely.
And so, if anything, they have a much better outcome than would have been expected had they been, in a different kind of situation. Yeah. So those are all sort of little additional things that happen, which...
And you see that a lot, by the way. You see that in the transplant world of kidney transplants and liver transplants. You see it in cardiothoracic surgery. And you particularly see it, unfortunately, in new programs that develop, because states will only have a handful of them in their respective states that will allow that. And they have to have good numbers. So you're right. So the places,
the numbers are
the little tiny places that are starting up, they're going to have unbelievable numbers because for the most part, most of their patients are really, really healthy because they need good outcomes. And just as you said, right, the big centers, they're doing all the re-ops. They're doing all the ones that nobody else will do, the sickest of the sick. That makes a huge difference.
And similarly, not that we do liver transplants in our office, at least I don't.
We're doing one tomorrow. I didn't tell you?
Oh, good.
Read up on that.
I'll have to find my special book on that. But some of the things that we do are reoperations on patients who've had suboptimal results or who've had complications or who, I hate to use the word botched because I think that that's, again, one of those commercialized.
A whole show made about it. Why not?
But patients who haven't had a good outcome. And anytime that you're operating on these patients who have already had surgery in the past, especially where something hasn't healed properly or they've had a problem in terms of their recovery, those patients are so much more difficult. And it's much more difficult to actually explain to them that the expectations have to be lowered as well because you're not dealing with pristine environment. You're listening to Plastic Fantastic with Dr. Robert Silich.
And Dr. Olivia Hutchinson. This is a tough topic. I know it's not the sexiest of our topics.
No, we're going to do real sexy next week, though.
Real sexy?
Very sexy.
Really?
Week. Yes. I'm going to put on my sexy
Can
voice.
I get a preview? All right, good. That's perfect.
We're going to wear our sexy blue scrubs, not just our regular blue scrubs. It's going to be
I love
a show for the ages. And then maybe we'll have some sexy music, too. That's your department.
I'm into it.
That's your purview.
I'm going to start picking the music now.
Thanks for listening. If you have an email that you'd like to send us about any topic, sexy or otherwise, please do so. Plastic, I can't even say
plastic. See, you're thinking about all that sex on your brain.
I was going to say plastic sexy.
Plastic sexy. That's a good one. PlasticFantasticShow@gmail.com. That's PlasticFantasticShow@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Plastic Fantastic with Dr. Robert Silich and Dr. Olivia Hutchinson. Produced by Mike Scheck. This is Bill Eugene speaking. Got a question? Email PlasticFantasticShow@gmail.com. And be sure to listen right here every week for another episode of Plastic Fantastic with Dr. Robert Silich and Dr. Olivia Hutchinson.